Good morning, Maranatha Bible Church, and happy Friday to you. Mike here with your daily devotional, and the topic that I'm going to be covering is the idea of outreach and evangelism. Now, I serve as the outreach pastor at Maranatha, and so obviously I understand that that is my bent, and that is where I spend a lot of my time and energy thinking about how can we reach more people and how can we be more effective in outreach. But I know for some of you, you have known that I have been going to the ABFs and doing either a week or 2 weeks training, walking through what it looks like and how to share your faith. And I actually did one just this past week on Zoom with Kathy's ABF, and I've had a really good time interacting with a lot of you on this idea of outreach. And so if I haven't gotten to your ABF, the goal is to eventually get there and cover what it looks like for us to share our faith. And when I cover that, we talk about what it looks like for those who are active in sharing their faith and who will share their faith, and then the other side of for those of us who really are not bent that way, where we really struggle sharing our faith on a regular basis. What are some things you can do? And we talk about those two different things, but I would say that all of us, in some regard, should be sharing our faith or thinking about evangelism or outreach in some way. Just like we would service in the church, that we would say all Christians are called to serve, or all Christians are called to serve one another, love one another, in the same way that we're all called on some level to do outreach or share our faith with our friends. And so I talk a lot about that in the ABS, but what I want to do just for a couple moments, I want to give you a quick application, something you can do today. And I want to look at Acts chapter 8. Acts chapter 8 is a pretty popular passage about the Ethiopian eunuch and Philip the evangelist, and how Philip has this conversation with him and really just sparks a conversation about what he's already asking questions. The eunuch is asking about. And I want to read one verse. It's in Acts chapter 8, verse 30. It says this. So Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet. And I understand you probably don't run into people reading Isaiah 53 every day. You probably don't run into people walking around asking about John 3:16 every day. But this is what he says. So Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet, and he asked, "Do you understand what you're reading?" In verse 31, he says, "How can I unless someone guides me?" And that phrase where he says, "Do you understand what you're reading?" One of the things that I think is important when you're thinking about sharing with someone is seeking to understand where they are, what they're going through, asking questions about their life, seeking to understand. A lot of times, one of the things that's very effective when you're talking with someone is asking questions about what they believe, why they believe that, and not always giving an answer unless they ask you. Unless they say, well, what do you believe? And it's in 1 Peter 3:15 that we would be ready to share the hope that we have within us with gentleness and respect. And so that's one of the things that I think is important, is really seeking to understand someone and why they believe differently, what they believe differently. And one of the things I think is extremely important is just staying focused on what Jesus did, not what they must do. It says in 2 Corinthians 4:4 that the God of this world, or Satan, has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel, who is the glory of Christ. And so one thing that I talk about as well in the ABFs, and I think is so important, is when you're talking with someone about sharing your faith, or you are sharing your faith, you bring up the idea of, hey, what is preventing you from accepting Christ as your Savior right now? What's stopping you? And a lot of times you'll get answers of, man, maybe I had a bad experience with the church, or man, maybe it's this one, thing that Christians believe, this, or this. And it's not typically, sometimes it can be, but not typically focused on the gospel. And 1 Corinthians 15 would be very clear that the gospel is this, that it is Christ died on the cross according to the scriptures, that he was buried, and that he rose again from the dead according to the scriptures. And I think when you're sharing your faith, you need to seek to understand. You need to ask questions about their life, but you need to focus on what Jesus did. They need to focus on the gospel itself, because the devil, Satan, has blinded the minds of unbelievers, really trying to get them off track of what the gospel actually is. That Jesus died on the cross and rose again from the dead, and putting our faith in that is what saves us. And so my challenge for you today is super simple and hopefully applicable for you. Seek to understand people who are far from God. Seek to understand what they believe, why they believe it, and really, honestly, it's just the basics of reaching out. And at this time and the day we live today, it's sending a text message, it's making a phone call, it's maybe sending our sermons to someone. I know I've heard a ton of people said that families and friends are watching in. It's letting them know that we believe that those who put their faith in Jesus go to heaven, and those who do not go to hell. And Romans 10 would say, how are they to believe unless someone tells them? How are they to hear unless someone preaches that to them? And so maybe you think of one person today that you know, that you can text, that you can call, or maybe that you can interact with on this level. And so hopefully you have a good day. I pray that God would use this time more than ever to see more and more people put their faith in Jesus. Hopefully you guys have a great day. Thanks.